All summer long, we've heard almost nothing but positive things from Republican rank and file to party insiders about how U.S. Senate candidate Kevin Smith was doing on the campaign trail. But that buzz has not quite translated to fundraising or poll numbers for Smith. Nonetheless, the candidate, as he always seems to be, is optimistic. And he's our guest this morning in studio. Kevin Smith, thanks for being here.
Adam, thanks again for having me on.
We appreciate the time. So, from talking to top Democrats and people who are familiar with the Hassan campaign, I think it's safe to say if there's one candidate in this Republican field they're a little bit worried about facing in November, it's you. But we don't see the Republican base responding, at least by the polls, if they're to be believed, in the same way. So what is the obstacle between you and the base?
Well, first off, I'd like to believe that they should be nervous of me taking on Senator Hassan because I think I'm the strongest candidate to take her on. Look, here's what I know about the polls right now. The biggest number in the last poll that came out is that the majority of Republican voters are completely undecided right now. Almost 50% of voters are completely undecided in this race. And when I'm talking to Republican voters, here's what I'm hearing. One, they don't want a kind of loose cannon Republican like Don Bolduc who shoots from the hip and has to walk statements back. But they don't want a weak-kneed Republican like Chuck Morse either. Chuck took 2 votes to authorize or expand Obamacare here in the state, and he recently took a vote to authorize millions of dollars to Planned Parenthood as well. They want a strong and consistent conservative, someone who's been a conservative fighter and a conservative fixer. And Adam, I've been that person for the last 25 years. From my time when I was in the state legislature at the age of 19 to running the town of Londonderry and also running the Pease Development Authority and having a great record of fiscal and economic success. I've been that conservative fighter. I've been that conservative fixer. And I think as the voters start to really analyze the candidates, they'll see that I am the strongest candidate who will make the case to the voters on why Maggie Hassan and her failed record over the last 6 years doesn't deserve another term in the United States Senate.
Clearly, somebody wanted to knock you down a bit when that story came out last month in the Huffington Post that included some allegations from a lawsuit that during your time as town manager in Londonderry, you, quote, dismissed and mishandled repeated complaints of workplace harassment and retaliation, end quote, made demeaning comments about women in the workplace. You believe it was a rival campaign that took this information from a lawsuit and gave it to a liberal blog.
Right.
It was the Morse campaign, you're saying?
Sure it was. I mean, look at Morse's campaign consultant was all over social media talking about it. I even confronted Chuck Morse himself over it, and he didn't deny that they had planted this story. But look, the whole story has, been said to be untrue by town officials, even colleagues who I've worked with. And people, this is a kind of smear stuff that the voters are tired of. They want people to be talking about the issues. They want people to be talking about what are you going to do for them when you get to the United States Senate, because frankly, right now in this economy, people are hurting, whether it's the high inflation they're feeling at the grocery store when they go shopping, the high prices at the gas pump, what they're going to be paying in electric rates, home heating oil, the crisis at the border, all of these things that people are concerned about around their kitchen table, that's what they want the candidates to be discussing and talking about. And those are the issues I plan to fix in Washington, Adam.
Just to be clear, in this lawsuit, it's alleged that you referred to a female subordinate as, quote, pork chop. Yeah. You're saying that's a lie?
It's completely untrue. And again, the town attorney has said it was untrue. Town officials have said it was untrue. And this is a salacious story that was planted by a rival campaign.
Democrats got a pretty decent chunk of their agenda across this finish line, this last week in terms of the Inflation Reduction Act. We know you would have been a no vote on that in the U.S. Senate, but was there any individual policy within that package that you could have supported on its own?
No. I mean, Adam, look, this was a $730 billion spending package. It also had tax increases on there for gas and oil as well. We also know there were taxes for small businesses in that as well. 94 small businesses are going to be hit with a new tax because of this spending bill that Maggie Hassan voted for. One of the things I've said that we need to do is go back to having the Gramm-Rudman balanced budget law back from the 1980s when we had to have a balanced budget in Washington or else there are automatic budget cuts. We haven't had a balanced budget since Bill Clinton was president with a Republican Congress. Maggie Hassan, there's not a spending plan that she hasn't voted for and hasn't liked, and that's what's caused so much of this inflation that we're feeling right now. And we really need to get the spending under control in Washington, and that's exactly what I plan to do when I'm down there.
Former President Trump's home searched by the FBI earlier this month, reportedly to recover top secret and classified documents. Some Republicans are saying in response to this that it's time to essentially dissolve or somehow majorly overhaul the FBI. Do you agree?
I agree there needs to be an investigation of the top senior officials in the FBI, Adam. I know my opponent in this race, Don Bolduc, has called for the FBI to be abolished. I think that's a reckless position to take. But there does need to be an investigation of the senior leadership, because people are losing and have lost their faith and confidence and trust in so many of our public institutions right now, Adam. The FBI should not be used as a politicized weapon to go after our political opponents. I think this set a terrible precedent, what they did. Look at when James Comey came out and said that we knew Hillary Clinton had taken classified emails on her personal laptop, had bleached tens of thousands of them, and that it was compromised by the Chinese government. Did we go and raid the home of Bill and Hillary Clinton? Of course not, because we knew that would have been throwing, gasoline on an already out of control fire. There had to have been a better way to do this. And I think it was just, again, set a bad precedent for the FBI to do this. And people, they want accountability, and they want these institutions to stop being politicized, which is why I've called for an investigation of the senior officials in there.
Let's talk about the abortion issue and the end of Roe versus Wade. This was part of your activism at the New Hampshire State House when you worked for Cornerstone, and you welcomed the Dobbs decision. Now, though, the real-life impacts. We read about this 10-year-old girl, the victim of incest in Ohio, who became pregnant, and then there had to be this major effort to find her a way to travel across state lines to end that pregnancy. Does a situation like that, as rare as it might be, give you any pause when, as someone who's pro-life, there's this celebration over this decision saying, yes, this is what we've worked for all these years? Well,
Adam, again, I believe the Supreme Court decision was right to return this matter to the states. I'm very proud of my pro-life record. I had a 100% pro-life record when I was in the New Hampshire House. I've also said to advance the cause of life, if it means having exceptions in the law for rape, incest, and life of the mother, I'd be okay with that as well. Here's what I'm not okay with. I'm not okay with Maggie Hassan's position on this issue, which is allowing abortion unlimited through 9 months of pregnancy and doing it at the taxpayer expense as well. That's why I've also called out Chuck Morse on this issue for supporting taxpayer funds for abortion providers like Planned Parenthood. It's just not right. I think Maggie Hassan has an extreme position on this particular issue. I plan to call that out when I'm on the campaign trail, because I don't think even most pro-choice voters in New Hampshire believe that there shouldn't be some limitations at some point in pregnancy, which is not what Maggie Hassan believes.
So let's consider a theoretical piece of legislation in the U.S. Senate, and you are a U.S. Senator. What if it's very narrow, that it is a legalization of abortion in cases of underage victims, rape, or incest? Is that something you could vote yes on?
Adam, I'm not going to comment on hypothetical pieces of legislation.
But don't voters deserve to know what you would do, I guess?
Well, again, they can look at my record on this particular issue, and they can look at what I've said on this particular issue. I do think this matter is probably best dealt with at the state level, again, which is why I think the Supreme Court made the right decision here. But look, they can look at my past record, look at my past statements, and have a good idea of how I would vote on this particular matter in the U.S. Senate.
You traveled to the U.S.-Mexico border earlier this year to sort of get a sense of how things are going down there. Maggie Hassan did that too. Took some heat, actually, from the left and the right. I think one of the names they called her was MAGA Maggie. It didn't help her at all with sort of the extremes on either side.
Right.
But it did put some daylight between her and the ultra-progressives and even the Biden administration. She's called for the continuation of this Title 42 expedited deportations. So if, say, a swing voter, an independent voter comes up to you and says, gosh, Kevin, it seems like Senator Hassan has stood up to the president on this issue, how do you respond?
I respond by saying actions speak a lot louder than words or a visit there. When I went down there in February and met with the U.S. Border Patrol Council, I was ridiculed by Maggie Hassan's team. And then she goes down to the border as well and does her own, prop down there by standing next to the wall. Look, I'm the only candidate that has a border security plan that has been endorsed by the U.S. Border Patrol Council. Senator Hassan, she sits on the Homeland Security Committee. She's had an opportunity to grill Secretary Mayorkas on this particular matter because he has said the border is secure, and we know it's not. And she hasn't done anything about it. She's had the opportunity to do it, and she just hasn't done it, Adam. I have said we need to go back to having the Remain in Mexico policy, which is a big disincentive from illegal migrants coming over. We need to end catch and release. We need to finish the border wall. We need an E-Verify equalized system or something similar to that for all employers in the U.S. And we need to end sanctuary cities. Senator Hassan hasn't taken one step on any of these particular matters. So she can go down there, put on her MAGA hat, stand in front of the wall. People can see right through it. She hasn't done anything as United States Senator to help secure the border. And Adam, one of the big issues, of course, are the illegal drugs that are coming across the border, ending up in all of our communities in New Hampshire. And that is something that is a big concern to me and something we have to stop.
To get those policy ideas across the finish line in the Senate, would you accept a deal that included a pathway to citizenship for the undocumented immigrants who are in the country now?
I don't think a pathway to citizenship is the right way to go. But I do think we need to bring them out from the shadows, because right now we know we could have up to between 2 and 3 million illegal immigrants in our country right now, and we need to have an accounting for where all of them are. But the first thing we need to do, Adam, more than anything else, is we need to close the border. We have to have a secure border. So before I would look at anything after that, that's the first thing that needs to be done.
All right, Kevin Smith, thanks for joining us on Close Up.
Adam, always a pleasure.
We'll see you on the trail.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll